My journey to politics is incidental. The larger journey is long back, way back in 1973 or thereabout. Just give this one medicine, all problems are solved. I never subscribed to that, even as I was fighting for right to information, or fighting for decriminalization of politics, or fighting for electoral funding law, or many other things among the accomplishments.
So Dr. Jaya Prakash Narayana is a physician by training and served as a member of the Indian Administrative Service for 16 years. He had a tremendously successful tenure and held many important positions in the government of South Indian state of Andhra. During the course of his service, he acquired deep insights into the Indian governance process and the problems afflicting the nation. Convinced on the need for radical reforms to transform Indian governance process, Dr. Narayana left the civil services in 1996 and the like-minded colleagues founded the Foundation for Democratic Reforms, which is called the FDR, and the Lok Satta Party, a people's movement for governance and political reforms. Since then, the Foundation for Democratic Reforms and Lok Satta have emerged as the leading civil society initiatives for governance reforms. FDR and Lok Satta have played a crucial role in driving several reforms over the years and are now focused on true federalism and effective and accountable local governments, rule of law, education, healthcare, and agriculture. Dr. Narayana served as a member of the National Advisory Council and the Second Administrative Reforms and Vigilance Advisory Council. And I would like, sir, to throw insight on the political journey, on his personal journey into the politics.
My journey to politics is incidental. The larger journey is long back, way back in 1973 or thereabout, when I was about 17 years old. I was born about a decade after independence. Many of my generation during our teenage years were very deeply disturbed about what was happening in the country, because the first flush of enthusiasm subsided after freedom. The hopes that our democracy will fulfill our aspirations were not realized in a large measure. There was a lot of corruption, arbitrariness, poverty, misgovernance, abuse of power, all kinds of things that led to a beginning of major movements in the country. I was a part of that. Instead of reacting to that or responding to that creatively and constructively, the ruling establishment decided to impose emergency, curtail civil liberties, convert the whole country into jail, and silence the people's voices. That was called the emergency. And I was one of those who rebelled against it very vigorously, very vociferously. I was kept under surveillance, but not jailed because I was a nobody. Only those with an organizational background who had some history were regarded as a threat, and I was obviously not a threat. Mine was a lone voice, isolated, without any organizational or political base. Then emergency was lifted because the people voted dramatically against emergency in the 1977 election. We all rejoiced. We hoped that a Gandhian revolution would come into being in the country and the nation would be transformed. But in a very short time, we realized that liberty was restored, but nothing else changed. The rules of the game remained the same, and we were deeply distressed. Around that time, I was finishing medicine. I was doing my internship, 12 months of rotating internship, house surgeons, as we call it in India. And I was deeply troubled about what's happening in the country and how to restore constitutional values and how to really ensure that the people get what they deserve. And in that quest, accidentally, I joined the IAS. When somebody suggested you were deeply anguished about the country, why don't you join the IAS? Around that time, the IAS opened up for us. No, doctors were not allowed to join the IAS until that time. Very strangely, like so many things in this country, there was no rhyme or reason. But just then, a commission came and they suggested that everybody should be allowed. And I walked into the civil services, and I was lucky. I was one of those very lucky ones in civil services. I was regarded as one of the most successful in post-independence India in civil services. I received enormous public support and love and affection. I could do some things. Many people believe way above the ordinary. But most important, I could learn a great deal, understand deeply what ails our democracy, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what needs to be done to make our democracy work for our people. Before that, I was anguished. I was concerned. I understood the symptoms. I did not know exactly what needed to be done. As a public manager, within the limited sphere, you could do the best you could. But once I understood what needed to be done to make our functional system perform better for the people, then I had a choice. Either rest on my laurels and continue in the civil services because I was widely respected, I made my reputation, my future was secure, but the country would not be changed, or leave the government and acquire the freedom required to mobilize the people and to articulate the need for change in the country and to work for the reforms by building a consensus across the country. That's what I have done. I left government in 1996 and I did not start a political party or join a political party. That was farthest from my mind. I founded the Lok Satta as a movement to unite all citizens, to bring them on one platform and to work systematically for institutional changes in the country. Lok Satta is India's most successful reform movement in the sense that we were instrumental directly or indirectly, in some cases directly and substantially, in 3 constitutional amendments, 91st, 97th, and 99th, about 7 or 8 major laws in the country, 5 or 6 major significant policy initiatives in the country. We achieved quite a bit by ordinary standards. But we are not content because relative to what India needs, relative to what needs to happen in the country, what we did was minuscule. It may appear big relative to the performance of many other groups in the country, but that is inconsequential. And as a part of that quest to engineer more changes, at one stage, many of us felt that maybe the people of India are more and more ready for reform politics without money power, without caste and religion and region, and without freebies and short-term gains. We hoped and we believed that maybe 10% of Indians are ready for that kind of a change. And once that support is visible, demonstrable, then we can push the system towards faster reform and greater reform. With that, we founded Lok Satta Party. While we received some substantial enthusiasm and public support, the vote is simply not enough, not in this part of the country. We were getting about 10% in big cities, very small percentage, 1 or 2% in rural areas. And because the local governments are not self-reliant, most local governments in India are a farce. Because local governments are titular, they're only perfunctory, they're ceremonial. Therefore, in the eyes of the people, there's no link between the vote they give and the consequences that result to their lives. And therefore, the conditions are not ripe for significant electoral success or reform agenda to be translated into action. And therefore, we have decided that Lok Satta Party will not be electorally competing for the time being. You take Delhi, for instance. There, Delhi is India's most self-governing sub-region. It's essentially a local government, though we call it a cabinet and so on and so forth. The Chief Minister of Delhi is India's most empowered mayor. Though Delhi's Chief Minister is weaker than mayors of most of the cities in the world, by Indian standards, that functionary is the most empowered mayor. And in a limited area, there is definite power, real power to effect change. People understood that. Once they saw the link between the vote and the consequences to them, at least in urban India, metropolitan India, people are willing to vote for change. In Delhi, that was translated into reality. In the rest of India, unfortunately, we have created weak, very feeble, inconsequential local governments. And therefore, the political evolution of India is going to be much harder. So, but whatever be the form, whether it's a political party or a civil servant in my case, or a civil society movement, or a citizen, or a public communicator, or whatever be the form, the goal and broad methods are the same. My journey is really continuous. It appears to be disruptive. Actually, it's not. Throughout my life in the past 40 years plus, there has been a continuous trajectory, the same goals, same methods, but The opportunities, they vary depending on the hat you wear and the circumstances that are available.
Politics can play a role in the developed sector, like be it in environment, sustainability, water or electricity, employment, job opportunities, and how will this play? How politics would play a part in the future development of the country.
Reshma, oftentimes we tend to think of politics as external, something different from our life. It's not true. Politics is integral to our lives. The notion that there is a life separate from politics and there is politics separate from our life, both are very dangerous notions. All of us live for ourselves. We want to lead a decent, dignified life. We want to fulfill our potential as human beings. We want to fulfill our dreams. And of course, all of us are temporary. We are ephemeral. Though as long as we are here, we think we are permanent. But we are cognizant of the fact that we are temporary. 80 to 90%, maybe 80, 85% of what we do, what happens to us in our lives, depends largely on the decisions we make and the effort we make. But there is that 15, 20% which cannot be done by us individually, which has to be done collectively, and it has a profound impact on our lives. That is the water supply that you get. You can't always have your own water supply, or the electricity, or the roads, the pockmarked roads, potholes, or the traffic, or a bit of a rainfall like today in Hyderabad, we have, and then streets flooding, or the sewers overflowing, or the mosquitoes all around you, or the schools that your children go to, or the health centers that your family goes to for health. These cannot be handled individually. These are necessarily collective. So the government and politics are about handling the collective with our resources. We are paying the tax money. We are voting to put people of our choice to make decisions on our behalf with our consent. And we expect in return, because we gave the money, we gave the authority, that they will deliver those outcomes. They will fulfill those collective needs. And it's not happening well. If it doesn't happen well, no matter how hard we work in our personal lives, our lives are going to be a mess. I keep telling people, no matter how successful you are, how wealthy you are, how high a position you reach, the mosquito that bites the neighborhood urchin in a slum will also enter your very expensive home, will bite you or your kids and transmit the dengue virus or malaria parasite. And you cannot control the mosquito only because of the efforts you make within your house. It has to be the collective effort. That is politics. There's nothing mysterious about it, nor is there anything spiritual about it. It's practical common sense. In India, we have given it up. Either we think of Bharat Mata and great spiritual thing and nobility, or we think of politics as extraneous and a nuisance and we revile it and reject it. Both are very dangerous notions. You need not defy the state or politics, and we should not reject or neglect politics. Because as Plato said, if we neglect politics, the price we pay is we suffer the bad governance, a bad man. So it is about our lives. So in that sense, there's nothing that matters to us which cannot be, which can be isolated from politics. We're talking about climate change, obviously. Climate change is actually a mega issue, which is not even in a particular government's control. It has to be transnational, because the action required is global. Whereas the short-term consequences of policies to reverse climate change are local, the economic consequences. The job consequences, at least in the short term, they're local. So it's a mega challenge. But ultimately, it is something that transcends even your nation, the governments of all the countries. If you want education, healthcare, obviously the government, the quality of education. Our education is substandard. We have very bright kids working very hard in the country. Parents sacrifice a great deal. Governments spend a lot of money. Societies value education, celebrate success. But educational outcomes are among the worst in the world. Our healthcare is in shambles, among the worst in the world. Now, everything is impacted by political decision making, by governance process. So I urge each one of us, don't look at it as a party politics. Which party is in power, who is in power, that's immaterial. The issues that affect our lives and how do we make an impact on them, that is true politics. And you cannot ignore politics. If we ignore politics, it will be at our peril. From pollution on our streets to global warming, from tremendous technological changes, and is our society equipped to deal with the fourth industrial revolution, to education and healthcare, to public order and justice, to your infrastructure and your water supply and your mosquito control. Everything is shaped by the collective decision making, of which politics is a process, governance is a process.
So next, sir, if you could also share with us on how good governance and nation building can go hand in hand for the development of the nation, which India very much requires.
Both the scope of governance and limits of governance. The notion that government or the prime minister or the chief minister or the office is everything is a very dangerous notion. That's a very fascist notion, that totalitarian notion. The notion that without government we can actually perform miracles is a very silly notion, very immature notion. So we must understand the role of the government and the limits of government power. Most of the things happen because of us. I already said 80% of what happens in our lives is because of our decision making and our hard work. Similarly, in the market, economic growth, apart from millions of individual decisions manifested in the invisible hands of the market, in the market system of competition, choice. But without a government playing a very sensible and critical role in making the market work, economy will not grow. Now, one of the mistakes many well-meaning people commit is, because we have seen excessive and intrusive government control, a license, permit, quota, Raj, which has undermined our economy, stunted our growth, held us back, we are so angry with that, we want to throw the baby with the bathwater. That is not the right approach. There are some people genuinely believe if the government is out of it, everything is fantastic. It's not true. Government must be out of a large number of areas, but government must do its job very well because there is no substitute to government. Market or competition cannot work there. For instance, rule of law. Now, without an effective and efficient rule of law, disputes being settled, justice being rendered swiftly and fairly without too much of cost to individuals, everybody getting access to it, and contracts being honored, and a recourse available if contracts are not honored. If contracts are not honored, where is business? Business is about you and I coming to an agreement, each one performing her part of the deal. If there is no confidence in that at all, if there's no trust at all, then there cannot be any economic transaction. Trust and faith are the basis of economic growth. Therefore, rule of law. Basic infrastructure, your transport, communications, and the basic amenities, water supply, sewerage, stormwater drainage, your traffic, and so on and so forth. Then quality education, particularly school education, but at all levels creating the framework for quality education, for genuine outcomes, and good quality health care. 50 million people, 5 crore people in India, they're becoming poor every year only because of lack of decent healthcare system. Every year, 5 crore people, either because of the high healthcare costs or because of lack of productivity on account of the illness. What it means is that if for about 10 years' time, if nothing else happens but improve our healthcare, India is no longer poor. The kind of pain and impoverishment resulting from poor healthcare is unimaginable. Now, if these basics are taken care of by the government, and if government makes judicious investments and encourages certain sectors depending on the way they appear, or shapes policies to suit the conditions. Look at China, for instance. The energy sector world over is undergoing a dramatic transformation. We are now on the verge of the fourth industrial revolution. The first revolution was the steam engine and the spinning wheel. Then from around 1900 onwards, we have seen electricity as the major, the electricity and automobile. Therefore, everything related to electricity, the electric light and the electric fan and the household consumer goods, from your refrigerator to air conditioner, to radio and television, to all kinds of things. Then the third phase is digital, the computers and electronics and so on and so forth. Now the fourth phase we have already entered, and that is the fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological, the genomic studies and nanotechnologies and the molecular biology and so on and so forth. It's a remarkable fusion. Dramatic changes are happening. Now, what has China done? Take energy sector. They've understood that the fossil fuels and the power generated with fossil fuels, or the automobiles run with oil, that's a thing of the past. Already solar power can be harnessed at an economic price. Storage technologies are improving by the day, and they're becoming more and more economical. But China is now the leader. They invested, the governments put enormous energy, put the policies in place to make the China the leader, from solar panels manufacturing to storage batteries to automobiles. So unless governments are proactive in these dramatic changes, because individual players, commercial players in the market, they don't have the scale, they cannot take the kind of risk required in the early phases of an economic evolution or economic revolution. And without government creating massive infrastructure so that the cost is borne by the community at large, the enterprises cannot move quickly and then take advantage of the opportunities or take risks. So that's the kind of policy framework. Government cannot dictate to you what you should do. Government cannot say, let there be solar power from tomorrow. But if technology is moving in the direction, it's economically viable, then sound policy and the right infrastructure and the credit system which supports that is critical. So it's not the planning of the government, it is the wisdom of the government and selective but sensible action. This is just one example. Because China moved ahead, China is now producing 70% of all the solar panels in the world, among other things. As The Economist in the latest issue says, until recently we've had the petro-states. They dictated the world's energy economy, from Saudi Arabia to other oil exporting countries. It will become an electro-state, because if electric power through solar energy is going to be a reality of the future, it is going to be a reality of the future, China is already there as a leader. Now, if you don't capture those moments, harness those opportunities, and only government can be proactive in making that happen. While technology and individual entrepreneurship are critical, they are there, they exist. But government must create the overarching framework. Electricity, for instance, the grid. The present grid must be transferred into the new kind of a grid. Decentralized production and then linking with the grid. If you have electric automobiles, the charging infrastructure across the whole countries. So a whole lot of things required that only the governments can do. That's the kind of very judicious thing, apart from basic infrastructure and, of course, education skills and so on and so forth.
And a revolution has been brought through it, and how important it is for us to know more about the RTI.
Now, there are many great citizens and movements who played a very seminal role in right to information movement. Aruna Roy of MKSS from Rajasthan, my good friend, and many others played a very important role. And along with Aruna, I was privileged to be in the NAC in the actual work of drafting and finalizing that and pursuing it and then making it happen. I also wrote the first report of the Administrative Reforms Commission on Right to Information Act. So one of the more satisfying things to make a law happen and then to make it work well. It's a very sound law. There are some deficiencies which I tried to overcome in the first report of the ARC. Unfortunately, that was not followed up. Otherwise, it would have been even better. And therefore, we can all take justifiable pride in something good happening. But the problem with our society is we tend to exaggerate the importance of one element and think of it as a panacea. Just give this one medicine, all problems are solved. I never subscribed to that, even as I was fighting for right to information, or fighting for decriminalization of politics, or fighting for electoral funding law, or many, many other things, some of which we could accomplish. I never believed that any one of them in itself is a solution. It's a part of the solution. Each one has a place. And the context determines which one you pick up and then you fight for, because the power of the context is the most important thing to harness in order to engineer change, particularly in vast and complex societies like ours. But we must not commit the mistake of believing that there is one silver bullet. We just do it and tomorrow everything is okay. That day it appears to be very romantic and dramatic and nice, but ultimately it will be dispiriting for the society. The morale will be affected adversely. It will make us cynical. So right to information is a very important tool, particularly because this opens many more doors. For instance, Right to Information Act was used as a tool by very entrepreneurial, bright journalists to unearth the 2G spectrum scam. Without Right to Information Act, we would not have known what actually happened in 2G spectrum scam. I think it was Tribune journalists. I remember talking to Chandan Mitra at that time and congratulating him and telling him to convey my congratulations to his team, which did a remarkable job. And then utilizing that, I went to Supreme Court to cancel the 2G spectrum licenses and ensure that allocation in future is made transparently by a competitive bidding process. So right to information is one such legislation, one such institutional framework that opens many more doors. And skillful reformers must fight for such changes, not a closed door thing. Once you do something, it must open another door, because there is so much to be done in the country. And that's why transparency is a very important element of reform in the country. About 65% of our people are below 35 years of age. Sheer numbers wise, the youth are the vast majority of the country. But if you actually take the number of years that the people below 35, below 25 are going to live, as opposed to people like me, I'm now in my early 60s, a number of years that my generation is going to live, you inherit 95% of the future. It's only natural that in a democracy, if 95% of your future is being decided today, you must have, if not 95% voice, at least 50% voice. So unless the youth are involved intelligently, collectively, constructively, creatively, unless they participate, not merely protest. People think that political engagement means protest. Of course, protest also is necessary. But protest is not, in my judgment, the most important form. Because if you believe in democracy, if you believe in citizens' power, you must harness citizens' power to make change happen, not merely shout from the streets. In a true democracy, there are only two instruments of change: the vote and the voice. Voice does not mean protest alone or sloganeering alone. It is the collective informed assertion. We must apply our minds. We must think through it. We must build networks. We must transfer ideas, communicate ideas, improve ideas, perfect them to suit our requirements, not go by sloganeering or emotion. And once we come up with tangible, sensible solutions, we must systematically and assiduously, we must make the change happen. Do whatever it takes within the framework of law and constitution. Once you do that, it may take time. But once you can persuade a significant number of people by the power of evidence and the logic, not by the lung power alone, not because you demonstrated on the street alone, once you really understand, then change will happen. Sometimes street marches are required, but the real change happens through thoughtful, committed citizens working collectively and constructively. Our own institutional immaturity, that requires us to take responsibility. And the more empowered you are, the more responsibility we must take. If you're more educated, you have greater responsibility. If you have more economic resources, you are more secure, you have greater responsibility. If you have more access to information, you have greater responsibility. If you have some voice, some influence, people are listening to you, you have greater responsibility. Now, if you take entrepreneurship, I think many Indians are naturally entrepreneurial because throughout our history, for millennia, we worked without big organizations and without government. Each community took care of itself, and therefore individual enterprise, the street vendor, the vegetable vendor, the headload worker, how are they surviving? Most unorganized workers, they're all entrepreneurial. So it is there as a part of our culture. Except that in the formal sector, unless you create the mechanism, and that is the basic infrastructure, access to credit, a legal framework that makes it easy for you to take risk, and contracts being honored, a rule of law framework. So unless these things, the other day, the Prime Minister in a different context talked about land, labor, laws, and liquidity. It's not enough to say it. You actually have to do the many things required to make all these accessible and friendly and hospitable to entrepreneurship. Otherwise, we have naturally entrepreneurial zeal. We only have to do whatever it takes to enhance it and encourage it, rather than to suppress it and discourage it. As far as politics is concerned, I already mentioned to you, there are two kinds of politics. One is the politics with the big P, going and contesting as an MLA or MP. As I told you, I wish I could tell you, I'm one of the first in India in this generation post-independence to encourage young people to join politics, to be engaged politically, not to revile or reject politics. I always said this. This is my common refrain. But the truth is, electoral contest in most parts of India is not available to you by ethical means. Money power, divisions in society, and short-term freebies have become the staple of electoral politics.